All right, today I'm joined by a very special guest, a returning guest to the DFL Daily, who wrote and passed multiple major anti-fraud bills in the Minnesota State Legislature, ensuring that our tax dollars are going where they're desperately needed. These are huge wins for our entire state. Please welcome DFL Representative Matt Norris. Welcome to the call.
Hi, Richard. It's good to be with you.
And he's taken the call from his car in between meetings. Thank you for doing that. You know, Matt, obviously, I've been a huge fan of the work you do up there in the northern suburbs for a long time. But some people may not know that when you were just a teenager, you were really focused on fighting and reducing violent crime in your own hometown. And you created internships for low-income students. And now you're at the Capitol. Your community elected you to serve them at the state Capitol. Public service has been a through line in your life. What are the strongest values that you have been taught from your community that folks hold that you now bring to St. Paul?
Mhm. Well, I think the biggest thing is just, throughout all of those experiences, I've seen how average, everyday citizens, when they step up and get involved, can make a difference in their community. You mentioned my early work on violent crime in my hometown of Brooklyn Park. That was something I got started with when I was 16 years old. Youth crime was a big concern in the community at the time, and I brought my perspective and said the reason these kids are getting into trouble is there's nothing for them to do in the community. And so we increased after school programs, we increased jobs, we changed up the way we did policing. And over a 5-year period, we reduced violent crime by 40%. And I think, today it's easy for people to get cynical about politics and getting involved in the process. They feel like, nothing actually happens. My experience has been the complete opposite, that when people step up, get involved, things happen, whether it's this, whether it's the organizing work we've been doing on manufactured housing across the state. People power matters. And so that's why I step forward to run for the House, and I, continue to do the work because I believe in getting together with like-minded folks to make a difference in our community and our state.
Fantastic. You have been as outraged about the fraud in government programs as anyone I've known. The stealing of taxpayer dollars from these critical life-saving programs undermine the programs themselves, and that outrages all of us. You authored this session the landmark Office of Inspector General bill, which passed the House 127-5. One of the most bipartisan votes we've seen in years, and it was signed into law by Governor Walz. Walk us through what this new OIG bill will actually do for Minnesotans.
Mhm. Yep. So yeah, the fraud is unacceptable. We have to take it seriously. No amount of fraud is acceptable in our state, and we should care about this because the programs that are being defrauded are programs that are meant to help some of the most vulnerable Minnesotans. It's designed to help, low-income families pay for childcare. It's meant to help kids with autism, seniors with disability, age with dignity. And if we believe in the importance of these programs, we should also believe in the importance of protecting the taxpayer dollars that support them. So this Office of the Inspector General will be an independent watchdog. It'll be placed within the executive branch, and really tasked with two different things. First and foremost, preventing fraud from occurring in the first place. We know that it is far more effective, far cheaper to prevent fraud rather than trying to investigate it after the fact and go after the dollars after they've gone out the door. So this office will be sharing best practices and standards across all the different state agencies. Also, they'll be sharing data so that if we see concerning activity in one state agency or one particular program, we can share that information across all the state agencies to say, hey, are we seeing a similar pattern? Are we seeing the same actors going after other programs and other agencies? But then if there is fraud that occurs, this entity will be able to investigate. They've got a full suite of investigative tools. So they're really going to be able to bring a lot of resources to bear to make sure that we're cracking down on fraud and hopefully preventing it before it takes place. But if it does happen, that we're holding people accountable.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the work on that legislation. It's going to be critical to safeguarding these programs long term. On top of the Office of Inspector General, you're also the House author of the Medical Assistance Protection Act, or MAP Act, which expands the Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, strengthens penalties for high dollar fraud, and gives investigators new tools to go after bad actors. Medicaid fraud has been a massive scandal in Minnesota, and you're tackling it head on along with the Attorney General, who fought like crazy to get this unit expanded. What does this bill actually change, and what should Minnesotans know about the scale of what's been stolen from public programs?
Yeah. So this bill does three things. First, it hires more investigators and prosecutors to help hold people accountable. Our Medicaid fraud control unit here in Minnesota is doing amazing work, and it's not just my opinion, that's objective fact. A federal audit from 2020 to 2022 that found that our Medicaid fraud control unit here in Minnesota secured the most convictions of any similarly sized state. And what makes it even more impressive is that the similarly sized states, most of them have 2 to 3 times as many people working in their Medicaid fraud control units as we do here in Minnesota. So this bill will help hire more investigators and prosecutors to add more people to the office, get us more in line with where we should be in terms of staffing for a Medicaid budget of our size. Second, it stiffens the penalties for committing Medicaid fraud so that we're holding fraudsters accountable. There's a stiff deterrence, and that we're bringing our penalties in line for Medicaid fraud with other theft penalties and the penalties you would incur from stealing from a private enterprise. You shouldn't, there should be the same penalties from stealing from the government as from stealing from a private enterprise. And then three, updating our definition of Medicaid fraud. There's the Medicaid fraud we're seeing today is really almost like a business model. These are entities that are set up using sophisticated methods to intentionally defraud the government. It's almost in a lot of cases similar to kind of like racketeering cases that we see where you've got organized crime entities. And so our statutes that we had on the books didn't always capture that sort of activity. And so now we're updating it so that we've got the tools in our toolbox so that AG Ellison's office can go after these fraudsters and make sure that we're cracking down on Medicaid fraud in our state.
You've been doing all of this and passing this massive legislation in one of the most difficult legislative environments. Obviously, the House is tied 67-67, where every vote is a negotiation.
Yes.
What's that experience been like day to day?
Yeah, I mean it's challenging, but I think Minnesotans expect us to be able to work together and compromise. I've always had my slogan from my very first campaign be building bridges and getting results. The notion of bringing together people from different backgrounds to get things done. And I think both bills, the OIG bill, the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit bill, were examples of that. Where we had different of opinions along the way. It took a lot of hard work. On the OIG bill, we had these infamous Tuesday evening meetings where we had Democrats and Republicans from across the political spectrum in the House and the Senate getting together to work through the different ideas, the different potential solutions. And in the end, we were able to come up with a really good product that got 127 to 5 vote in the House, passed unanimously in the Senate. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit bill passed 118 to 16 in the House. So it shows that when you put in the work, try to work together to find compromise around shared goals, you can get some really good work done.
Fantastic. All right, Matt, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. You don't know this question's coming. How many doors have you knocked on in 2026 so far?
So I am at almost 3,000 door knock attempts so far. So I start knocking when daylight savings time starts in early March, when we get some light in the evenings. And there's some really cold days when you're doing it in early March. I get bundled up. I got my hand warmers and my gloves and everything. So I'm glad that the weather's finally starting to warm up a bit. But it's been great. I love having the conversations on the doors, especially during the legislative session. There's so much noise at the legislature. People get wound around the axle about so many different things. And when you're outdoor knocking, it gives you the clarity to understand what's actually on the minds of the average Minnesotan out there.
It's really your like touch grass moment, right? Because
It
sometimes I
is.
could sit at the DFL headquarters and be surrounded by noise, and then I get out to a convention, and it is just so refreshing to meet Democrats out in the wild and hear directly from them.
It is 100%. I agree with you.
So, in those conversations at the door, what are you hearing? What are people in suburban Twin Cities community talking to you about? What are the priorities they're concerned about?
Yeah, a lot about affordability. That continues to be a top concern for people. And so I talk a lot about the three cares: healthcare, childcare, and senior care. And if we can bring down the cost of those, it leaves more room for gas and groceries, the things that keep going up and up because of wars and tariffs and things above my pay grade here at the state level. But also still a lot of concern about what's happening at the federal level. The violations of our constitutional rights, our civil rights that we saw earlier this year, the abuse of government power. And so I think people, both at the federal level and the state level, are saying, who can we elect this November to be a check on what we see as some real overreach by the Trump administration?
All right. Last question. What gives you hope right now?
One of the things that's giving me hope is seeing young people getting involved in the process. I was out door knocking last night and had a new canvasser come on board. And she actually was a constituent who we teamed up together, she and her dad, when she was in high school, on a bill that we got passed through the legislature. And she's about to graduate high school now. And we hired her as a canvasser, and just, her enthusiasm and her belief in the power of our politics to make a better life for people, to make our state better, to make our country better. And so it's always fun to see. I mentioned I got started when I was 16 years old, and where it's led me now. And so it's always fun and inspiring to see that next generation coming up, and can't wait to see where she and so many other young people go as they start to get involved in our politics today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here, Representative Norris. Appreciate all the work you did this legislative session and passing these really important landmark legislation. And good luck out there on the doors.
Thanks so much, Richard. Great to be with you.